Hi, welcome back to Serger Tip Clips. Today I'd like to show you the beading foot. It's a specialty foot and an accessory foot. And I was just recently at a workshop where someone was asking, how do you use it and how do you attach beads to the edge of fabric? So I thought that would make a fun tip clip for everybody to see. But just because it's named the beading foot doesn't mean that's the only thing it can do. I've also used it for wire edge ribbon, and that's a fun technique to learn how to do. I want to show you the anatomy of the foot and talk about a few of the specifications that you have to keep in mind when you use it. So let's take a look at the beading foot and the anatomy first. Before I show you the foot, I just wanted to show you this little sample that I made. I found this in my stash, and it was the very first thing I ever tried attaching beads to. And just to show you that it isn't hard to do and that it was very successful, this is just a piece of scrap sweatshirt fleece, and I had these beads and they're strong. So I had to do a little bit of adjusting for stitch length, and I'll talk about that when we go to the foot. But just to show you that for the first try, I think it came out pretty nicely. And let me just show you the underside. Nice and clean, very nicely finished off on both sides. So just to show you that it takes maybe a little bit of practice, but this was my first go around. Now let's go to the foot. I'll move this aside. Here is the beading foot, and it has this little channel or like a canal or almost like a little bowling alley gutter on the right hand side, and on the back of it there's a little archway. And so you've got to have your beads be the correct size and make sure that they will go through without getting stuck or hung up. And I believe the maximum size on this would be about 4 to 5 millimeters, and you'll want to check on your beading foot instructions. It will probably tell you on the packaging what the maximum size is. And just quickly going back to this first one, I would say that this is probably the maximum size I could get through, because it was a little bit of a tight squeeze. They did go through, but again, I don't think I could go one speck bigger than these beads themselves, and they probably are about 4 or 5 millimeters. So on this, let me just show you how this works. And I have these little red beads to make it easy to see. What you're going to do is you're going to get it set up just like this. The beads will ride along in this little canal underneath the archway, and they will attach to the fabric edge. And I'll talk about the machine settings also. And I did this quick little sample with rhinestones, which I thought were really, really pretty. And if you're thinking about making something that's very dressy, evening wear, if you've got a special occasion coming up, look how beautiful that is. And this is just a small piece of linen, but it takes a plain fabric and really, really makes it look very, very pretty. And I thought this came out very nicely as well. And on this one, I used monofilament thread in my upper looper, and you'll want to test that out. Some monofilament threads can be a little trickier to use, so find one that your serger really likes and stitches well with, but that just disappears. And when we go to the machine, I'll show you what I have in my needle as well as my lower looper. So let's go over to the machine and get set up for that. Before I actually use the beading foot, I wanted to show you something. I don't have a thread that matches my fabric exactly in color. So my next choice was monofilament thread, and I'm actually holding a piece of it, but I doubt that the camera will pick it up because it's clear. It's very fine, and that is in the upper looper. And I didn't want the thread to show, but monofilament thread doesn't always like to go through the air threading tubes without a little help. So I'm making a thread cradle where I've taken a long piece of thread, folded it in half, and I'm putting my cut ends into the upper looper threading port. And I'm going to do that, pull that out, And you always want to hang on to the little loop end of it, or the whole thing will go flying off a few feet away from you. And I'm going to put my monofilament thread through the loop on this. It's like a little lasso almost. And I'm going to let that pull the end of it through to the upper looper. But if you have a thread that's a very good match for your fabric, you don't have to use monofilament thread. But it is kind of nice because it really just literally disappears on the fabric itself. So I'll put this back to serging, and we will get started on the actual setup for this. So let me tell you what my machine settings are. I am set up for a 3-thread rolled hem, and I have the right overlock needle in, and my stitch selector on this machine is set to D as in delicate, and I've slowed my speed way down. Now, if you don't have speed control on your machine, you can certainly do this technique. Just lighten up when you step on the gas pedal. And because these rhinestones are square, I disengaged or locked my knife because I just want to make sure that I can have them slide through without having any problems being crowded. And this is the string of rhinestones, and there's a little metal piece between them. It's not a thread that's holding these together. So again, I just want to be really careful with what I do with that. I don't want to damage my machine or anything else. On the underside of my fabric, I just press the edge because I have disengaged the knife, and I want the edge to be nice and clean underneath the rhinestones. So that's all folded, and you can see I've interfaced this fabric too, just for stability. So I am going to set this up, and I'll probably just open my machine again to give me a little bit more clearance. And with the rhinestones, you want to make sure that they are right side up, and that's another reason to take your time. But you also just want to take your time just to make sure that the needle doesn't bump into any of these. Again, when you're using the maximum size of what will go through your beading foot, you just want to be careful of your machine as well, but it does work very, very nicely, so that's okay. So I'm just getting this into that little channel, that little canal on the right hand side and under the archway, and I'm going to pull it forward just a little bit, get that all set up, and make sure nothing is twisted here. Good. Alright, and let me close up shop here. Again, my knife is locked, so I'm just going to let the fabric slide along as if it's going right against the edge of the knife, and we'll get going on that. So let me just bring the beads back to make sure I've got enough length, and I think I'm ready to go. Oh, and let me give you my other stitch settings. Depending on how large your beads are or how much space is between them, that's going to determine your stitch length. For these, I am up to a stitch length of 3, and that's much longer than you typically would have for a traditional rolled hem. Usually your rolled hem might be between 1 to 2 for a stitch length. But because there is spacing between these, I'm going to experiment and put it on 3. I may have to stop and readjust that a little bit, but we'll see how we do with it. I'm going to get my needle down, and you can see in order for this to work, it kind of makes sense that the needle has to be to the left of the rhinestone, simply because the stitch has to encase that and grab the edge of the fabric. I'll put my presser foot down. I just did a little bit of testing on this, and I decided to move my stitch length up to be a little bit longer. And one little tip that I have is to give yourself a couple of extra inches on your beads or your chain or or rhinestones, just to make sure that you can do a little bit of chaining off on those. You want to make sure that the very end is in back of your foot and not down in the machine, because that can damage it. So that's just a little safety tip on that. And I noticed actually before that mine had fallen down into the machine, so I wanted to stop to fix that. So let's give this a go. And I'm just going along very slowly just to make sure everything is working. And I'm going to help it along with my left hand in back of the foot, just to make sure that those rhinestones are advancing properly. Here we are, all finished up, and that monofilament thread virtually disappears on top of that. But again, if you don't have one that a monofilament, you can use a thread that matches your fabric pretty closely, and it'll look just fine. But it's beautiful. The only thing is you just want to take your time, give yourself a little bit of extra length at the beginning just to make sure that it doesn't fall down into the machine, because you can have a real problem with your loopers if it gets hung up in those. So that's just a little safety tip with that. But I think it's really beautiful, and you can turn just very basic fabrics into something really spectacular with beads or rhinestones along the edge. It's really kind of a fun technique to learn how to do. So that's the beading foot. It's pretty easy to use. Thanks for joining me today. And be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's free, and you'll receive a little notice in your email when I've posted a new tip clip. And you can also find me on Instagram now. I'm at g.p.design. So take a look at that, and you'll see some fun behind the scenes photos. Thanks again, and we'll see you again soon.